Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining GP Bullhound's Global Tech Predictions webinar today. We will get started shortly, just giving people a little bit more time to dial in. Again, a warm welcome to everyone and great to have you join us for GP Bullhound's Technology Predictions webinar today. I'm Maria Lazareva and I'm based in our London office. I will be your host for today's session, where we will analyze the 10 key trends driving digital transformation in 2022 and beyond. Today's webinar follows the global release of our 2022 Technology Predictions Report. And from the GP Bullhound team, we are joined by the authors of the report from San Francisco, Marbella, and London. We are also extremely pleased to welcome two special guests, Peyman Zamani from Logicbroker and Liz Wessel from WayUP, to share their insights on building and scaling successful software businesses. Before I hand over to today's presenters, I would like to run through a few points with you. Today's webinar will take between 60 and 90 minutes, and we will, of course, share a link to the recording after the event. Please look out for an email in the next couple of days. We won't be using the chat function today, but if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box, and we will try to answer as many as we can after the presentations. You can also find more information on our upcoming online and in-person events at gpbullhound.com/events, or by following us on Twitter and LinkedIn to stay in the know with all the upcoming activities. Again, for those who have just joined us, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box, and we will share a link to the recording of the webinar in the next couple of days. Before we dive into our key trends, I'm delighted to hand over to Per Roman, Managing Partner and Co-founder, to share his thoughts and insights on the state of the tech market. Over to you, Per.
Thanks a lot. It's a real pleasure to be here. As a business, the GP Bullhound Group, we've had our best year ever. We've grown to over 200 people in US and Europe, all dedicated to our beautiful software and internet industry. And we probably have the most riveting trend shifts I've ever seen. I mean, the acceleration of digital is just unstoppable. We saw last year how through the use of AI and collaboration software, some of the smartest scientists in the world were able to create RDNA, which we thought would take COVID away, but we're still in COVID. And it's almost embarrassing to admit that that keeps on accelerating the adoption and usage of all formats of digital, both for us as consumers and in enterprise, in and outside of the classroom, and in the healthcare field. So it's truly kind of a pivotal era. We see the emergence of Web3 and digital tokenization, underlying a decentralized and DeFi system in finance, enormous innovation coming our way, and we're only in the very first innings of that. We see cloud-based software proliferating the business world in all sectors and horizontals. We keep on being entertained as consumers by Squid Games and all these other beautiful products launched by our digital friends in the media industry. And while all of that is happening and all of us as enterprise users and consumers keep on adopting more and more, keep on putting more and more technology into everything that we do in our lives, we at the same time are witnessing the largest supply chain glut I think our industry has ever faced. A huge shortage of semiconductor components, sensors, and so forth. So we're living through unusual times. We've also seen in the private equity markets a continued flood of growth capital propelling companies to even greater heights and very open IPO markets. At the same time, in the public markets, we have seen some choppy waters. Many high-flying COVID stocks, if you will, have taken a real beating during the latter half of this year. And stock markets have basically been held up by big tech. But with all of that said, what really makes me excited is to see what is happening at the fundamental level. the acceleration around artificial intelligence, the journey towards metaverse, the decentralization of finance and ownership. These are huge trends that we're only in the beginning of tapping into. And it's going to be really riveting for me as well to listen to my colleagues talk about this in much greater detail here today. You won't hear from me again. So before I hand back to Maria, I just want to say thanks to all of you for an amazing year. And 2022, here we come.
Thank you very much, Per, for sharing your insights today. Next, I'd like to invite Okan Inaltaly, Vice President from our San Francisco team, to share the latest on GP Bullhound's highlights and observations on the trends to watch next year. Over to you, Okan.
Hello and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm Okan Inaltaly, a Vice President at GP Bullhound based in our San Francisco office. I have been with the firm for 8 years and I'm excited to be here today to present to you with our technology predictions for 2022. The annual technology predictions report is a collection of our team's top 10 predictions for new and emerging trends in technology in the upcoming year. This is the 15th edition of our report, and our goal is to identify which technologies will see the greatest market adoption and progress in the next 12 months. For those that aren't as familiar with GP Bullhound, we have a few slides that I'll run you through. The firm was founded in 1999. We celebrated our 21st year of anniversary last year. We have done more than 540 transactions over that time period, and we have 10 offices across Europe, the US, and Asia, with more than 150 employees spread across those geographies. The firm has delivered over $25 billion in transaction value to clients, and we have done over $600 million in assets under management through our funds. On the next slide, you can see some of the key sectors we focus within the technology landscape. Our key sector focuses are software, digital media, digital commerce, fintech, and digital services. Next slide highlights some of the completed transactions for our firm in 2021. In interest of time, I won't go through all of them, but thought I would highlight a few that are most relevant to our trends predictions. In our previous report, we forecasted an acceleration of education technology, which was evidenced by our client Busuu being acquired by Czech. One of this year's trends center around supply chain technologies. Logicbroker is a software provider in this space focusing on drop shipping, and we help them raise capital from K1 Investment Management. Another one of this year's trends focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our client WayUP prioritizes this in its job platform, and we help them merge with Yellow. Our GP Bullhound fund also invested in some of the key teams that we are discussing in this report. WayUP is a leader in digital fitness. They have a wristband that helps monitor various health benchmarks. The final one I would mention is we are predicting a further growth in the creator economy, and we are invested here through Patreon. Next slide highlights the core team that authored the report. The report is truly an end result of a global collaboration across our offices. Our investment banking team in San Francisco, with support from insights and creative services teams, authored the report while gathering very important feedback and intelligence from our bankers across all of our 10 offices. Each year, we present a transparent assessment of our predictions from the previous report to maintain a high level of scrutiny on our own research. It's kind of like a grading sheet on how we fared on our previous predictions. Our first prediction in 2021 was education in the 21st century. We predicted that there would be an increase in adoption of education technologies across the world. This one we picked correctly, as in the US, large school districts such as Miami-Dade County signed contracts with notable edtech platforms such as PowerSchool, and large enterprises such as Verizon and AT&T have committed substantial dollar amounts to edtech initiatives. Our second prediction was the new patient-doctor relationship. Health organizations fully embracing health tech tools illustrated that we predicted this trend correctly. The Cleveland Clinic partnered with IBM to enable advanced computing in healthcare, and Rwanda's national ID agency partnered with UK's Babylon Health to expand the reach of their primary care services in the country. Our third prediction was I want it now e-commerce. This trend was also picked correctly as online commerce continued its growth and buy online, pick up in store continued its strong demand from the previous year. According to a survey, more than 70% of consumers now expect buy online, pick up in store option to be permanently available going forward. Our fourth prediction was the next social network. We correctly predicted that the gaming will take up a bigger portion of social interaction. Fortnite, as an example, in partnership with the Time magazine, hosted a March Through Time Martin Luther King Jr. event, which was attended by more than 8.1 million players. Our fifth prediction was consumers taking control of privacy. It is unclear to us whether we picked this one correctly due to the rapidly changing privacy landscape. Our prediction was true in that many states across the US followed in the footsteps of California, making wide-ranging digital privacy laws to protect their customers. This pushed companies like Apple to improve their privacy functionality on their platform. However, the shift to total consumer privacy has not occurred just yet, as companies like Google and Facebook are not as transparent on their data practices. Our sixth prediction was the survival of the fittest. We believe we picked this one correctly, as home fitness remained to be a significant segment of the fitness market. Purely online platforms such as FitOn has grown significantly. They grow from 0 to 6 million members in the past 18 months. Our seventh prediction was cash is no longer king. Digital payments surged in 2021, mainly through buy now, pay later, which proved our prediction to be correct. Large corporations are also adopting buy now, pay later into their payment stacks, such as Amazon, which partnered with Dafferner. Our eighth prediction was the future of work. Our prediction of a hybrid office structure remains to be unclear due to the still present COVID-19 virus. Some businesses have mandated a complete return to work, such as we've seen with the financial services firms. Others have adopted a completely remote approach, such as Coinbase, Dropbox, Slack, and Spotify. The Omicron has further complicated matters in the near term as the world copes with its effects and develop plans to return to their offices. Our ninth prediction was marketing technology all-in-on customer experience. As evidenced by the large fundraisers and M&A by strategics, we believe that we predicted this trend correctly. Some notable deals to mention would be, Active Campaign, who raised $240 million at a $3 billion valuation, and iTerrible, who raised $200 million at a $2 billion valuation. Our 10th and the final prediction in 2021 was Epic's Ultimate Battle Royale with Apple. Our prediction that Apple would change their rigid posture against developers proved to be correct. Epic's litigation had a knock-on effect as Google also lowered their developers' fee. With that, we have now completed the recap section of our prediction, and we'll start taking a look at our technology predictions for 2022. Our first prediction is creating a new economy. Today's influencers are ushering in a new creator economy where they can create and monetize their own content, which they serve through their fans through many channels. Globally, there are over 50 million influencers on YouTube, Instagram, and other social media platforms. There are also numerous challenger platforms that continue to grow, such as Patreon, which tripled their valuation from to more than $4 billion in a fundraise by Tiger Global. In the US, these creators are accounting for nearly 400,000 jobs and are earning significant incomes without having to work the traditional 9-to-5. Brands have now fully embraced influencers as a marketing channel. For example, Pepsi aimed to increase their sales with millennials and chose to run a influencer marketing campaign, which was a huge success. They ended up receiving more than 50 million impressions and more than 50,000 engagements with their content. The interest in influencer marketing has led to the emergence of comprehensive influencer marketing platforms, such as Like to Know It, which was valued at the $2 billion by SoftBank. Another key component of this trend will be the decoupling from the platforms. The emergence of NFTs has created an additional avenue for creators not only to publish their content, but also gives more ownership to their work. An example of a prominent NFT transaction was the digital artist Mike Winkelsman, who sold his digital artwork for $69.3 million at the Christie's auction. Artists understanding how NFTs can help have begun to build platforms to help other artists, such as the famous EDM artist Blau, who built his NFT music startup Royal. Investors globally have also realized the importance of NFTs and have invested in this space. The well-known NFT market space, OpenSea, raised $100 million at a $1.5 billion valuation led by Andreessen Horowitz. Final note, we are as a firm are very familiar with the influencer marketing space from a software point of view as well. We advised a company called Clear, who does influencer marketing software, on their sale to Meltwater earlier this year. Our second prediction is technology supercharging supply chains. The COVID-19 pandemic severely impacted the global supply chains. In early 2020, many suppliers couldn't produce goods quickly enough to meet the demand as consumers attempted to stock up their supplies, such as toilet paper, garbage bags, or even non-perishable goods. Then there was a worldwide consumption freeze as quarantine orders were issued. Consumers were no longer shopping as frequently, which led to the suppliers to slow down or even suspend their production. As the world has now opened up, companies have faced shortages and price increases of raw materials that are necessary to produce their goods. Shipping and labor shortages have forced companies to look out for ways to optimize supply chains and alleviate their bottlenecks, which was found in supply chain software. Supply chain software helps with controlling and reducing costs, providing insights in production abroad, and shipping goods locally. There are a number of companies within this vertical that are impacting different parts of the supply chain. One, Flexport, is a leading freight forwarding provider in the world. They offer a full range of services, all informed and powered by their software platform. Two, Flug Freight helps to end the tug of war between shippers and carriers using artificial intelligence. The company raised more than $200 million from SoftBank, valuing the business at a $1.3 billion valuation. And three, Stored has created the cloud supply chain. They combine physical logistics services in their software platform. They raised $90 million from Kleiner Perkins, valuing the business at a little over $1 billion. The interest in the space is warranted as these technologies can drastically reduce shipping and freight costs. For example, health and wellness brand TB12 has seen its fulfillment costs shrink by 25% since switching to ShipUp, a tech-enabled third-party logistics company. Governments are also attempting to help here. US President Biden has begun to work with the US Army Corps of Engineering on a $4 billion worth construction work. Additionally, the port in Long Beach, California is now open 24/7 to help reduce the build-up inventory arriving in California. These policy changes have helped, but there is still much work to be done. As nations and businesses invest in this category to increase efficiencies across the supply chain, we predict that the supply chain technologies will see a surge of adoption in the coming year. With that, I'd like to pass it over to my San Francisco-based partner, Alec Dafferner, to have a fireside chat with Peyman Zamani, founder and CEO of Logicbroker.
Thanks, Okan, and welcome, Peyman. Really glad to have you with us today.
Thanks, Alec. It's great to be here, and some very exciting trends listening to.
Yeah. Well, maybe just to kick it off, for those who don't know, why don't you just tell us a little bit about Logicbroker and the need in the market that you guys are addressing?
Sure, sure. It's definitely exciting time in tech and e-commerce, and you look at trends coming up next year. I look at trends coming up in the next decade. Really, definitely exciting time. And when you look at what has happened to online business and supply chain and the retail overall, it's we call it retail reimagined. It's just consumer behavior transformed. So when you look at retailer brands, any companies that just want to grow their online business and they want to grow it fast with not expanding their warehouses, they want to expand assortment and offer more inventory and do that through different connection, whether it's BOPUS or connecting to suppliers that can dropship on their behalf. And they want to do it for with a company that has the technology to do that, and also experts that help them with best practices. That's what Logicbroker does. We help retailer brands really expand and extend their assortment, and obviously, pandemic has impacted our industry significantly.
I guess one of the things we see, we're a very global organization. When you look at your customer base globally, what are some of the differences that you see within different geographies?
Yeah, when you look at yeah, we are obviously global, and we are in 3 different regions with employees. And one of the example, we have one of our clients is Samsung, Fortune 5 company. They act differently in different regions. They looked at a lot of our competitors. They looked at building a solution themselves. They realized nobody have the most complete solution, but Logicbroker can get them, and with a track record to get there faster. And where in some region, they act as a seller. So they, in their APAC region, they're selling, they're drop shipping in marketplaces like Lazada, Shopee, eBay, Australia. Where you go in France, they act as a retailer and they launch in a marketplace to act as a retailer and drop ship through sellers. Or in the US, they're doing a traditional drop ship as a retailer. So you see these emerging trends where brands, they want to be in charge of their growth, and they are willing to switch hats, sometimes act as a retailer and sellers, and that's trend is going to continue into next year and probably the foreseeable future.
What does the typical Logicbroker customer look like?
So when you look at a typical Logicbroker customers, the traditional retailers, so we got companies like Walgreens, Rite Aid, Kroger, these are companies. When you go on Walgreens, let's say you're buying a PCR test and some paper towel and a power bar, you think you're buying it from Walgreens, but under the hood, those orders are routed to drop shipper or suppliers or manufacturers that are shipping it directly to you, Alec, and you're going to receive it right away with Walgreens branding and happy with your experience. So that's a typical scenario. But we also have a lot of brands like Samsung I was mentioning, when they that you wouldn't think that, wow, they do drop shipping. Brands like Coca-Cola, Hasbro, Mars M&M, that they use Logicbroker to sell on marketplaces, or they launch their own marketplace, like I was saying, as a retailer in UK, to take advantage of these consumers that no longer going to stores shop, and they're going to TikTok, or they're getting in Facebook, or looking at a video, and they just act on buying something, and they want to go to a website that give them a great experience.
There's been a number of macro trends. We talked a little bit about COVID-19 and the impact on global supply chains in the report, but also just the overall growth in e-commerce accelerated by the pandemic, and the continuing shift to retail sales from physical to digital. How are these trends impacting Logicbroker, and how are in your overall approach to the market?
Yes, good question. I wish I would say I was a visionary. I foresaw this pandemic happening. Not in my wildest dream I thought we're going to go through what we have gone through past 18 months. But one thing I knew that's why I got into this business. I've been in this business for over 2 decades, and I knew that these retailers need to be digital enabled, and they've been kind of pushing it down. Maybe the VP, the executives got it. Hey, we need to be more digital, enable digital influence, but the C-suite and the board weren't getting it. But now every C-suite, every boardroom discussion right now is how can we become digital enabled? How is our supply chain can be take advantage of more of tech trends that like we were hearing earlier from Per, whether it's AI, if you wanted to touch less, how can you leverage more AI robotics to influence those automation and those days of walking, you're still there are a handful of people walking into a store and finding that blue pants and picking it up, paying at the cash register, which is cool. I mean, that continue to be a part of it, but the majority of it is digitally enabled. Hey, there is no blue, you want the black. So you just go pay at the cash register, the black pen shows up at your door, or you're traveling, you're in a hotel and you just go online, buy it, it shows up in the lobby, or you're sitting having lunch and browsing TikTok and see this widget that you want and you order it, and 2 hours later it's in a lockbox. So those are all digitally enabled purchases in D2C, in e-commerce, that we know that Logicbroker can have an impact from a technology and delivery model to help that.
That's helpful. Maybe one last question. What do you see as the primary opportunities and threats as a result of the issues we're seeing in the global supply chain?
I think the threat is if you didn't reinvent yourself past 18 months, you're way behind. I'm still baffled that we're having inventory issue, in like appliance industry or auto industry, where there are parts somewhere that they can be assembled. Yeah, you might not have access to labor, but there are other ways of robotics, AI, to assemble things and give visibility to those inventory. And it's all about visibility of knowing that, where is that piece of finished good or raw material you need. And on the opportunity side, those that have been able to pivot and innovate and take advantage of this global economic changes in supply chain and e-commerce, they're going to win. They're going to make a killing, as you were mentioned, some of the folks at the early discussion. When you look at stock market, it's some companies are way down and some way up. Guess what? Those companies that are way up, they are taking advantage of the opportunity in the supply chain automation.
Peyman, this has been great. Really appreciate you spending a few minutes with us today. Maybe with that, would like to pass it over to Alexis Scorer, who's an executive director in our London office, and he's going to present trend number 3.
Thanks, Alec. So moving on to our third trend, the rise of decentralized finance. So, this is one of the most exciting areas in crypto. And although the DeFi movement is still in the early stages of development, as Per mentioned in the intro, it has the potential to completely change how we think about the entire global financial system. And we're predicting that 2022 is going to be a pivotal year for DeFi in terms of institutional adoption. In just over 3 years since the term DeFi first emerged in a Telegram chat between Ethereum developers back in 2018, the movement has already grown into a thriving multi-billion-dollar ecosystem. And just to put this growth into context, total value locked, which measures the value of collateral deposited in DeFi protocols, has grown from 14 billion this time last year to over 100 billion today. And the TVL metrics you see here, these are from DeFi Pulse. So this monitors protocols on the Ethereum blockchain and accounts for about 80% of the TVL when compared against the top 5 chains like Avalanche and Solana. But regardless of which measure you use, I think the staggering statistic here is that as recently as April last year, total value locked was sitting at just over 800 million. So I think it really, this really gives you a sense of just how fast this market has been growing. Now, the first generation of DeFi protocols, including lending and borrowing applications like Maker and Aave and Compound, as well as some decentralized exchanges like Uniswap, which I think is now processing close to $2.5 billion a day in trading volume. Now, these were some of the first decentralized apps, or dApps as they're called, that replaced traditional financial intermediaries with these self-executing smart contracts and pooled funds from multiple users secured by code on public blockchain networks. And one of the biggest catalysts for DeFi was the liquidity mining program launched by Compound in May last year, which incentivized lenders and borrowers with tokens. And this has been emulated by a number of other protocols since. Not only are these tokens allowing new projects to secure billions in liquidity in a matter of months, but they're also allowing users to participate in the governance of these protocols. So last count, there were over 520 DeFi apps ranging from asset management to complex synthetics and insurance. And I think the reason why there's so much excitement about DeFi is that it's enabling a completely transparent global financial ecosystem that operates without any central authority. It's accessible 24/7 to anyone with a smartphone or an internet connection. So unlike banks or brokerage accounts, DeFi does not need government issued IDs. You don't need a social security number. You don't need a proof of address or a credit score. So in terms of adoption, it's still very early days. So that I think there are around 10 million people that have downloaded the MetaMask wallet, which is one of the most popular ways to access DeFi. But if you look at the early adopters, it tends to be your kind of experienced crypto investors who understand how to use smart contracts and manage multiple digital assets. So we are a long way from digital, full mainstream digital adoption, but we're starting to see now growing institutional adoption. And we think that this is going to really accelerate significantly in the coming year. You're seeing innovations in areas like custody and compliance is really removing some of the barriers for institutional players in the market. And already a number of Wall Street banks are relaunching their trading desk for digital assets. I think there are, at last count, 24 governments, including the US and the UK, that are actively researching central bank digital currencies. And in October of this year, France's third largest bank, Société Générale, submitted a proposal to raise $20 million in a loan from the MakerDAO platform to refinance some tokenized bonds on Ethereum. And I think if that happens, that'll be the first time a major bank borrows from a DeFi protocol. So we're seeing this reflected in fundraising activity. Consensus raised $65 million from JP Morgan, MasterCard, and UBS, as well as Protocol Labs and Maker Foundation. And then here in the UK, there's a London-based crypto custody firm called Copper that just raised 50 million. And then, of course, recently we saw that the $420 million Series B announced. It was actually the Series B1 by FTX at a $25 billion valuation. So exciting times. And with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Garret Vaz, who's Vice President based out of our San Francisco office, to introduce our next trend.
Thank you, Alexis. The next trend that we'll be talking about is the next arms race. Recently, the landscape of processors has been evolving. For many decades, Intel's 86 processors have been the most widely used in the fixed machine landscape. ARM processors, on the other hand, have been limited to being used mainly in mobile devices. This trend is starting to change as more tech companies transition to the ARM platform. Due to the reduced instruction set computing, or RISC, ARM-based chips are much more efficient and versatile than their Intel counterparts. They have up to twice the CPU performance speeds and also consume significantly less power. These efficiencies bring about distinct advantages for applications like AI and ML and the ability to be deployed either in mobile or desktop devices. The transition to ARM processors will also make new software cheaper and easier to develop, while legacy software will need to be retrofitted to fit that. As the shift to using ARM processors accelerates, some companies are opting to develop their own competing CPUs, increasing vertical integration. Apple is one of the first movers in this space and recently announced the M1 chip, which will be included in the latest MacBook Pro. Google and Microsoft are also developing their own ARM-based processors for use in personal devices and cloud servers. The use of ARM-based processors in CPUs can expand the potential of AI and ML, and that's the exciting part. Given the versatility and energy efficiency of ARM processors, the physical applications cover the entire array of IoT devices. ARM-powered devices will be able to run advanced AI algorithms on the edge to process more data and make better inferences. To date, their use has mainly been limited to improving smartphone functions such as facial recognition, fingerprint scanning, and voice-activated commands. Future uses could include making autonomous vehicles safer, improving the functionality of wearable medical devices, and making faster inferences in countless other fields. In September of 2020, NVIDIA invested heavily in this space, announcing a $40 billion agreement to purchase ARM, a leading developer of RISC CPUs based in Cambridge. The transaction is currently still undergoing various government competition authority reviews, but if it is approved, NVIDIA's scale will likely push much broader customer adoption. Our prediction is that the broader adoption of ARM-based processors will expand the potential and usage of AI and ML, with industries such as healthcare and transportation most likely to benefit in the near term. And the fifth trend that we'll be presenting is the new digital playground. Over the past couple of years, COVID-19 has accelerated the use of video conferencing software, with people now spending more time online connected than ever. To put this into perspective, video conferencing software use is up 21 times pre-COVID-19 levels. This digital transformation shows the strong acceptance by the masses of online immersion, paving the way for the metaverse to take a foothold in the economy. As businesses look for more ways to create better and more immersive online experiences, their target audience has generally already been shifting to that space, whether by habit or by personal preference. The metaverse is still in its developmental stages, with some large companies such as Meta, formerly known as Facebook, starting to focus significant time and resources on building parts of the metaverse. Multiplayer video games such as Fortnite and Minecraft were some of the first wave of metaverse-like experiences, which allowed for players to collaborate with each other and customize the characters, which are some of the key traits of the metaverse. Meta is one of the largest investors in the metaverse space, with $10 billion of planned spend on Facebook Reality Labs this year alone. After being plagued by public skepticism over media control and privacy rights, they have shifted their focus to the metaverse, announcing several products that they plan to have an impact in this space. This includes the development of a new virtual reality headset, AR glasses, and Horizon Workrooms, which is a VR space with the purpose of remote collaboration. As Meta will be a centralized metaverse, it's clear contestants they will face are the decentralized metaverse players such as Epic Games, Roblox, Sandbox, and some others. The decentralized metaverse, which is blockchain-based, is designed to provide greater choice, independence, and opportunity to users, where users own their own digital assets. It is also intended to include technology that protects the rights and dignity of the individuals using it. Based on the developments that we have seen in this space, we predict that the metaverse will continue to draw attention over the following years, rather than come and go as a fad. It is unclear on how the metaverse will eventually look, but we will likely witness more companies entering the fray, announcing the strategy to enter the metaverse in the near future. We recognize that the metaverse is still largely in its infancy and expect to see beta versions of the metaverse in the next year or so. The sixth trend that we will be covering is technology powering diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI has become a must-have part of mission and vision statements of companies around the world. This is a result of two main drivers, globalization and changing societal standards. Globalization has made it possible for corporations to seek talent from different geographies and backgrounds, as well as create a unified work culture that welcomes differences. Ever-changing societal standards are setting the bar high for corporations, especially initiating and supporting heterogeneous workforces that have gender equality as well as racial and ethnical variety. Making the DEI space even more appealing, corporations are finding that DEI in the workplace tends to boost business performance in terms of profitability. According to a survey by PwC, highly gender diverse executive teams are 21% more likely to outperform in profitability, while 85% of CEOs with diverse and inclusive work initiatives have noticed increased profits in their company. As the demand for DEI is on the rise across public and private sectors, AI and ML-driven algorithms are starting to drive unbiased recruiting solutions. This creates more opportunities for marginalized candidate groups and helps companies make data-driven choices. There is more diversity data available to companies than ever before. The 26 billion online recruiting market is over 770 million self-reported profiles just on LinkedIn, and more than 2.5 billion multi-source profiles on People Data Labs. Utilization of advanced software solutions to manage this vast amount of data is crucial, while it also improves workplace demographics to smooth out biases. Technology can enforce DEI initiatives in many ways. It can address unconscious bias, prevent talent bias at the point of decision, and allow the company to gain actionable insights from analytics and metrics. Companies across many industries are embracing blindfolded hiring methods to drive DEI. Maersk, Terex Corporation, and Hero Group are some of the companies that are using software solutions to reduce inequities and bias to increase DEI. Technological interventions in the space are proving to make workplaces more fair, equitable, and diverse. Several other companies are making big moves in the DEI space. This includes the merger of WayUP and Yellow in July of this year, while Beamery, Eightfold, and Canvas have raised significant capital to continue its growth in DEI recruiting space. We predict that technology-powered DEI initiatives in the workplace will become crucial for companies in the next year, with increased post-COVID labor demand pushing HR managers to utilize software solutions to streamline diversity hiring practices, while society standards pressure corporations to diversify their workforces. I'll now pass it back over to Alec Dafferner again, who will be having a dialogue with the CEO of co-founder of WayUP, Liz Wessel.
Thanks, Garret, and welcome, Liz. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I think we just heard some interesting stats and thoughts from Garret. It'd be great for you, maybe for those who don't know WayUP, maybe just tell us a little bit about the business and the need in the market that you guys are addressing.
Sure. So for those who don't know, WayUP is a platform that helps employers recruit diverse talent. We most focus on early career recruitment. So typically students, recent graduates, or people earlier in their career in maybe the corporate working world, like veterans who are, returning from serving our country for the first time and so on. We are US based, and this summer, thanks to GP Bullhound's help, we actually merged with Yellow, which is another company in the recruitment software space that does a lot more of the systems for recruiters to use. So kind of that CRM, interviewing suite, and so on. And so we merged together so that now you can really source, screen, interview, hire in a really equitable fashion. The vision being a white man who applies for a job at a customer of ours has the same exact chance of getting hired as a woman of color. And with most companies today, that's not the case. But if they're using our software, then it should be.
You guys describe yourself as kind of a two-sided marketplace. Can you tell us what that means?
Yes. So on the WayUP side, we actually are also a B2C, our business to consumer business. So we essentially have a two-sided platform. Employers, as I mentioned, use WayUP to source and recruit and hire. But we also have millions and millions, to be specific, over 6.5 million candidates across the US who use WayUP to get hired. So they'll create profiles kind of like LinkedIn, but if it was built for more early career focus with DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, with a DEI focus. So essentially what we're doing is we're helping these employers recruit candidates, and then candidates get recruited and found by employers. It's a fun kind of marketplace, though, in that both sides have the same goal, which is to get hired or make hires, as opposed to maybe a farmer's marketplace where one side's trying to get the cheapest deal on the tomato and one side's trying to get the most profit for that tomato. So the good news is we get to be a little bit more of a everyone wins if one side wins kind of marketplace.
One of the common refrains we hear in the market is we can't find enough qualified, diverse applicants. We hear that. What's your perspective on that?
So if it's early career, then I call BS, and I don't know if I'm not allowed to curse on here, so I'll just say BS. If it's early career, there is more than enough talent, and especially for early career roles, whether it be associate roles, if we're talking finance, and we work with most of like the largest, financial institutions in the world, whether or in the U.S., whether it be sales roles and so on. The fact is that you should be hiring for potential anyway. And the amount of experience, like one kid having, an internship in college because their mom was a VP at that bank versus another kid who worked their way all the way through school and paid for their education and this and this and this, like the two are probably actually not going to perform too differently. If anything, a lot of companies tell us that the latter will often perform really well if they showed that there was a lot of, work that they had to do throughout college. But the fact is that at the early career, there is more than enough diverse talent. You just need to use a platform like a WayUP. And I don't mean to sound like a commercial. There's other platforms out there as well, but a platform where you can actually find the diverse talent. So like with WayUP, you can actually say, I'm looking for people who have a computer science degree and are women, or are people of color, or are Black veterans with a computer science degree. You can get that specific, and it's all EEOC and OFCCP compliant, meaning it's compliant with all the government regulations, and the candidates are self-identifying. So they're saying, hey, I'm opting into being found, using this information. So that's the first piece. I think at the later stage, though, that's where it gets really hard. People talk a lot about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there's this really great quote. I know you guys included it in the GP Bullhound newsletter about how diversity is being invited to the dance, but inclusion is being actually asked to dance. And I really love that quote, because at the end of the day, you can bring in all this diverse talent at the bottom level, at the early career, or at any level, but you need to make sure you're also promoting them from within, and that your leadership looks, the way that you want your early career hires to look. For almost every company I've ever met, and even my own, by the way, that's not the case. And it's because of the fact that we're now, when you're hiring a VP, you are hiring on experience. And unfortunately, there's been this chicken and egg problem. So I think it's really hard at the top levels, and the companies that seem to be doing the best are companies that are hiring a lot more for potential, or are looking for people who might not be as obvious of a choice. But I do totally sympathize and understand why, it can be a lot harder to recruit diverse talent at more senior levels today. Although hopefully, thanks to companies like WayUP, it won't be 10 years from now, because we're bringing in that diverse talent to our clients' organizations, and they're growing from within.
Maybe one last question. How have you seen DEI change from a corporate perspective in the last couple of years, and how do you see it changing in the next few years going forward?
I wish I could be only optimistic here, but I'm going to be honest here. So we started the business in 2014. Around 2017, the very, very famous #MeToo movement happens. And all of a sudden, for about a month or two, we had a large number of companies coming to us saying, we want to hire women. And I said a month or two, because about 2 months later, they didn't seem to care that much. And all those budget initiatives went to like really flashy, cool splashes. And then, or they brought on one board member and said, let's pat ourselves on the back, we did it, and move on to the next problem. Then the murder of George Floyd happened about a year and a half ago, just over a year and a half ago. Very timely, given a lot of the news coming out about Derek Chauvin just an hour ago, actually. But I think that what's amazing about that movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, is that it did not last 1 or 2 months. I think it's absolutely stuck with a lot of companies, and we are seeing just as much interest. We were seeing just as much interest 6 months ago as we were seeing 18 months ago from companies looking to hire more diverse talent. Now, the terrible piece, though, is that we're coming up for 2022, and we're starting to talk about with our clients of what are your top initiatives. Going into 2021, 100% of them said diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now we are hearing more and more of those companies saying we made a lot of headway, and it's no longer a top 3 focus. It's no longer a goal. It's not a top goal. And we are starting to hear that. And that's horrible, of course. It's like, no one wants another event like that to happen to get people back to caring. So I think the companies you'll see that continue to care are the ones that brought on chief diversity officers or senior leaders who would focus on diversity. I love a lot of companies, a lot of the Fortune 100s actually ended up having part of their executive compensation tied to diversity within the business. As long as they're keeping those goals, then I think you're going to continue to see those companies invest in and focus on bringing in and growing diverse talent. And then as long as we keep seeing venture capitalists and investors investing in companies that are helping with this, we're one example of that. There's a lot of other companies that are helping more on the inclusion side of ensuring that companies are bringing in, not just bringing in, but also growing diverse talent from within. One company called Dandy is doing an incredible job with that, with a data analytics perspective. So yeah, I think it's been fascinating to watch, and I hope it's not going away, this focus on diversity, but unfortunately, I think it won't be what it was a year ago, but I do think it's going to be a much more promising look at than maybe right after the Me Too movement, where we saw it was a little more of a blip.
Well, thanks, Liz. That's great. I think that wraps the Q&A session. So really, really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So now I'd like to pass it back to Garret to present trend number 7.
Thank you, Alec. The 7th trend that we'll be touching upon is going to be about the wearables. So the wearables industry had a popular peak back in 2019 with wide use cases in sports and fitness. A second breakthrough is near, with wearables producers realizing that the real value is not in the hardware, but is actually in the data and the software. They're encouraged to invest and develop powerful AI engines to drive actionable insights for their users. AI algorithms are increasing use cases for wearables in various industries, especially in sports and well-being, as well as healthcare. In terms of sports and well-being, wearables are widely used, but the functionality is changing with AI-enabled capabilities. While wearables were previously used mainly for tracking purposes, wearables are starting to develop and leverage AI to create customizable experiences for each user, presenting unique experiences and insights to each of their customers. It is really exciting to consider the upper limit of potential in wearables. The following anecdote of the WayUP wristband is an example of the power of wearables. The WayUP wristband has the ability to detect the subtle changes in a user's respiratory rate, among other things. During a PGA Tour in June of this year, pro golfer Nick Watney noticed that his respiratory rate had climbed to the 18s from his usual rate of 14s. The raised respiratory rate prompted Watney to get tested for COVID-19 and ended up withdrawing from the tournament. The ability of the wearable to detect early symptoms of COVID-19 prevented further unintentional spread of the virus by the athlete. Regarding healthcare, diagnostics are going through a digital transformation by using AI-enabled wearables to provide the best and most accurate results. Devices connected through IoT and wearables that can detect and diagnose diseases are one of the exciting digital trends to watch for in healthcare, with companies such as MorePro, Philips, and Neuromai Solutions being some of the companies that have helped shape the development of wearables in the healthcare space. Gartner studies predicts that user spend on wearables will more than double from 2019 to 2022. The revenue model of wearable producers have also changed and evolved over time as more advanced analytics and AI software are embedded in the wearables. The previously large and front-loaded hardware costs are shifting instead to subscription revenue. So companies now are charging less for the physical wearable and more for the software itself. A recurring subscription fee is generally charged to users in order to enable all features to be used. In terms of the wearables market, it is becoming more and more fragmented as ever, with preferences becoming more complex and niche players emerging. Even though large generalists such as Apple, Samsung, Huawei, and Xiaomi take up about half of the market share, the rest of the market is highly fragmented, with specialized players such as WayUP and Fitbit. Companies such as H&M and Peloton are also trying to enter the wearables market, with other companies such as Hero and Tractive making waves in the M&A space. Based on these developments, we predict that the wearables industry will experience another breakthrough period in the next 12 months by leveraging AI algorithms that will feed on the abundant data collected by the wearable hardware itself. Here to talk about the next trend is my colleague, Inge Heydorn, who is a partner from the Spain office. He specializes in the semiconductor space and heads up our public funds activity.
Thank you very much. Next slide, then, please. And we can even move to the next slide. And my area is really the global semiconductor shortage. It's an area which we are really engaged in on the public side. And I really would like to break down the global semiconductor shortage into two pieces. So, because they are the same thing, it means shortage, but there's two different drivers behind it, and one of them will last for a very long time. So let's start with a simple thing, and that's what we call the trailing edge, meaning car industry products. We really 29 nanometer. So it's quite old semiconductors, and when it comes to 28 nanometers, it's all about capacity. So we had the COVID coming and inventory is becoming very low, and now everybody wants to build again and sell products. So we happen to have too little of capacity really in the industry. That's being addressed. We're adding capacity, but on the same time, we had some lockdowns in Vietnam, in Malaysia, and so on, and thereby there was some disruption of the chains, and thereby further delays. But that's an area that will be solved quite soon, sometime during 2022. It will be solved on the trading edge. Moving down to the leading edge, I think we're in a completely different scenario, and that's why we've been so engaged on the public side on this. And we think that the shortage here will last for many years. The semiconductor industry has been cyclical in general. If you look historically, it's been driven by Intel, like Garret talked about. It's the Intel processors been really the key driver of where we have development and so on. That's really not the case anymore. As you know, the ARM protocol is open for everybody. A lot of people are developing on that protocol. So we have so many more players in this industry driving the industry forward to enable AI, enabling cloud solutions, smart cars, and so on. And thereby, there's a heavy push on the equipment guys, on the production, to bring out smarter and smarter products, meaning smaller and smaller components. And if you look at that part of the industry today, it is extremely tight. And the easiest way to look at it is that try to go buy a Sony PlayStation or an Xbox today. It's impossible. And on top of that, the price sensitivity in the industry has almost disappeared. If I go back, I started in this industry and looking at semiconductors in 1994, and the whole talk was all about ASPs declining, mobile phones going to $50. Today, we're paying over $1,000 for a mobile phone. So the price elasticity has completely changed. If you look at the PC industry, I think a GPU now from NVIDIA or AMD costs more than a normal PC, and we're willing to pay for it to get a good PC we can play games on. So the willingness to pay is there. So the industry has been driving by earnings and really profitability and demand. So what's going to happen on the lower end is that we're going to see further development here, but the industry is running as fast as they can to keep up with the demand and with the new products. And that's really, it's not really helping in the short run. And when I mean in the short run, I'm thinking 5 to 10 years. That's how at least we can see forward for the moment now, that the industry capacity will lag behind demand. So this is a really interesting area, and that's why we've been engaged for it for a long time. And we need to separate between the trailing and the leading edge. The trailing and the car industry and simpler components, that will be solved next year. If you go to lower end, 5 nanometer we're talking about now, but remember the next Apple product will probably come on the 4 or 3. And last week, or even this week, sorry, Intel CEO has been in Taiwan trying to buy up capacity for his next chips, because Intel is clearly behind this, so they need to use outsource production to get capacity, and they're struggling to get capacity, and that's how simple it is. So this is an area that will be a really focused area for a number of years from here on. That's really my presentation. And over to Gerry Kelliher now for trend number 9.
Gerry, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Inge. Before continuing with our tech trends, I'd like to remind the audience to please submit your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll be having a Q&A segment at the end of this webinar. Our next trend is artificial intelligence automating healthcare at all levels. The COVID-19 pandemic has placed increased pressure on healthcare infrastructure, driving the need for widespread improvement. One specific area that we see AI revolutionizing is electronic health records, known as EHR. An EHR is the systemized collection of a patient's historical medical data in real time. Past diagnoses, test results, and any other data logged by healthcare professionals are saved on an EHR that encompasses a patient's entire private health record. Historically, this data is both unstructured and poorly integrated across various systems. Through the implementation of artificial intelligence, this vast but underutilized data warehouse can more effectively be used to improve remote care outcomes. AI-powered models can make more complex patient assessments with a higher degree of accuracy, which should ultimately lead to wider adoption of virtual care. Prior to the pandemic, only 15% of patients reported using virtual care. That figure stands at approximately 35% today. As consumer trust continues to grow and the technology continues to improve, we expect this participation rate to keep increasing. Another area that we see AI impacting is remote patient monitoring. With the growing popularity of connected wearable devices, the total universe of available healthcare data is constantly increasing. Artificial intelligence can leverage this vast data set to provide advanced analytics in real time. AI-enhanced monitoring and detection will give patients the freedom to visit healthcare institutions less frequently while still benefiting from the early detection of health issues. One recent transaction of note was Microsoft's $19.7 billion acquisition of Nuance in April. Nuance is a provider of conversational AI and cloud-based ambient clinical intelligence for healthcare providers. This deal represents a potentially significant trend as big tech looks to automate healthcare. With regard to the transaction, Microsoft's CEO said, "AI is technology's most important priority, and healthcare is its most urgent application." Our last trend is the future of payment. Buy now, pay later is disrupting both the payment and e-commerce industries with its rising popularity among consumer and merchant groups. As younger generations continue moving away from credit cards, they're becoming increasingly reliant on debit cards. These consumers see installment loans as an attractive alternative to credit cards, a means of purchasing items that they could not otherwise afford. Merchants now realize the benefit of offering a buy now, pay later option to increase average order values, improve conversion rates, and acquire new customers. Since the pandemic, buy now, pay later providers have benefited from the surge in online shopping. We expect that the current momentum will continue increasing merchant adoption rates. Additionally, we expect to see buy now, pay later providers broaden their existing services. Some of these potential growth areas include offline payment options, such as in-store purchases at small and medium businesses, integrated marketplace communities, such as Klarna's, which allows users to shop from multiple online stores in one location, and geographic expansion, particularly into regions such as Africa and Southeast Asia, where credit card usage has historically been low. Competition within the sector is becoming increasingly intense, with both traditional financial giants, such as JP Morgan and Citi, and traditional tech giants, such as Apple, developing alternative products. The increasing amount of capital moving into the space is likely to accelerate the sector's growth, with global annual spending expected to reach just under $1 trillion by 2026. We predict that the traditional buy now, pay later companies, powered by their strong existing user base, will continue to expand their services and potentially offer larger scale finances. Two recent transactions of note were Square's $29 billion acquisition of Afterpay in August and Klarna's $45.6 billion post-money valuation in June. Two staggering headline values that demonstrate the bullish market sentiment across the sector. That concludes our presentation of our 2022 tech trends. My partner Alec will now lead us in our Q&A segment.
Thanks, Gerry. And thanks everybody for submitting your questions through the Q&A function. We're going to just dive in and start covering a few of these, but just a reminder, if you do have questions, submit them through the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So let's see here. I guess first question, what are the current issues preventing DeFi from mass adoption, and how can these issues be solved? Alexi, you wanna cover this one?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one, Alec. Yeah, so look, I mean, I think if you're talking about mainstream adoption, I think the knowledge barriers are still quite high for your average retail investor. But you know, one of the biggest barriers recently has been this really high transaction costs, or gas fees as they're called. I mean, these have shot up partly due to all this NFT and DeFi activity leading to congestion on the network. I mean, to just give you an idea, transaction fee for a token swap on Ethereum is around $25, which is obviously way too high for retail investors. But there are some planned upgrades to the Ethereum network, which including the switch to proof of stake next year, which will address some of these challenges. But the most promising scaling solutions are these so-called layer 2 zero knowledge rollups that use advances in cryptography to execute transactions in batches off chain, and they can reduce the fees for a token swap to as low as 60 cents. And actually, that's where we're seeing a lot of the VC dollars flowing right now. And companies like Starkware, Matter Labs, Off-Chain Labs all announced very large rounds in the last few months, and we expect that to remain probably one of the hottest areas for VC investment in the next year.
That's great. Thanks, Alexi. We've got another question here. It looks like one related to the creating a new economy. Trend 1 says, will creators be forced to choose one specific channel to publish content, or will it continue to be cross-channel? Okan, you want to cover this one?
Thanks, Alec. Yeah, sure. This is a very interesting and relevant question. Actually, platforms have already begun to pay for specific creators to create and publish content dedicated to their platforms. I know we've seen this with Snapchat. More recently, Facebook has followed suit and done the same. And I believe the power will be ultimately in the creator's hand, and the decision will be up to them versus the platforms dictating. And due to the unique aspect of each platform and the fans who they are getting engaged with, I believe the creators will create unique content for each channel in order to engage more naturally and holistically with their fans.
Thanks, Okan. We've got another question here. How and when will user adoption of the metaverse occur? I guess this is on trend 5. Garrett, maybe you want to cover this one?
Yeah, I can take that. Thanks, Alec. I think the best way to answer that question is to answer the when first. I think most likely it'd only be the end of 2022 or 2023 before, it really starts to take hold at all. And it'll be most likely, I would say 3 to 4 years before it really takes hold and becomes more mainstream. I say that because I think the first kind of big wave that you'll see in adoption is once the big players roll out their metaverses, such as Meta, for example. And as long as it's accessible and affordable, unlike the VR kind of trend that occurred a couple of years ago, where the VR headsets were just too expensive to be adopted mainstream. In the mainstream, I think as long as it's accessible and affordable, in 3 to 4 years, I think most people will be able to adopt that quickly, as Facebook users will be able to integrate easily into the Meta and test out the metaverse and get used to it. In terms of how, I think the decentralized metaverses will always be in the background, although most likely a subset of the population will be using it until, again, the big players, roll out their metaverses and it becomes largely adopted. Then I think users will use those centralized metaverses and then kind of experiment and play around with the decentralized metaverses. And at that point, they'll kind of find a preference and lean one way to another. At that point, I think the preferences really be felt out, and then there'll be a land grab for either centralized or decentralized metaverses.
Thanks, Garrett. We have one question here about buy now, pay later. What are buy now, pay later providers' competitive advantages when the big tech and finance companies enter the field? Gerry, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alec. I think, the biggest advantage that the current providers really have is a twofold first mover advantage. So, this is really, if you think about it, on both a user base as well as a merchant base. So, as a lot of these providers are now starting to expand their marketplaces and build out their apps more and their offerings, they're increasing their brand loyalty and they're increasing the value that they're adding to their particular users, as well as that, the particular merchants who are selling the end products, ultimately, they only really need, a handful of providers. And so having that existing relationship with the current providers gives those current providers a competitive advantage when new entrants come into the market.
Thanks, Gerry. We got a question about semiconductors. Inge, the question from the audience is, to counter the shortage of semiconductors and the security risk of production being focused in China and Taiwan, should the UK increase production, and is it capable?
It's absolutely capable, and it's happening now in Austria, Italy, Germany. You subsidize the factories, so Intel and other vendors, Infineon, is coming in and producing, and I think that could happen in the UK also. Should they do it economically? No. For security reasons, maybe, but I think it won't be a problem to get products from other countries like Spain, Italy, Germany, and so on. So I don't see that as a big risk. If you think China's risk, absolutely. But in terms of economically, a production factory costs, to be frank, say $15 billion to build. Takes 3-4 years to build, and then you have to keep capacity high to earn money on it. So it's very hard, and that's why we have the structure we have today, with some factories in Arizona and Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and China, and that's the ones we really have around the world. But we're going to have more local ones subsidized by governments. But if you need one in every country, economically, the answer is no.
Thanks, Inge. We've got one on the supply chain. What areas of the supply chain will be most disrupted in the coming years? Okan, you want to cover that one?
Sure. Thanks, Alec. We've talked a lot about freight shipping, and that's an area that I believe, will be one of the areas within the supply chain will be getting disrupted the most. More specifically, I would say the trans-ocean shipping. With all the technological improvements and as the supply chain gets smarter over the years, I would anticipate seeing trucking and the last mile delivery to continue their kind of improvement over the next couple of years. I know that SoftBank has already begun to invest in the space. They've made an investment to Flug Freight, I believe in October.
Yeah, that's helpful. Let's see. On the, I guess, wearables trend, I don't know if anybody wants to cover this one, but how does the importance of hardware technology change for each sector? Anybody want to cover that one?
I can tell from the hardware side, so on the semiconductor side, if I start with that, it changes everything, because power consumption and battery time is a key enabler for almost everything. And on top of that, smaller chips are faster and can make faster decisions. So that's a really key driver when it comes to a lot of equipment.
That's great. Maybe one last question. I know we're getting tight on time. So one question was, again, back to the buy now, pay later. What is your view on the buy now, pay later regulations? Would there be regulation tightening, and how should companies adjust? Gerry, you want to cover that one?
Yeah, sure. This is a big question in the industry. I mean, ultimately, as with any new developing technology, there's always a bit of a lag with regulation, and it will definitely be key to monitor as governments increasingly regulate buy now, pay later with worries over overextension of credit. And I think the key to understand on an individual player perspective is that most of the providers are very well aware of this, and they are trying to be on the forefront of any potential regulation, and they are trying to do their best to both self-regulate and take views to try and potentially influence what end regulations the governments end up actually rolling out. And I think that will be kind of the key to surviving that changing regulatory environment.
Great. Well, I think that wraps the Q&A. Maria, do you want to take it from here?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Alec. I guess with that, we have reached the end of today's session. Thank you to all of our presenters and to our guests for joining us today and sharing your time and your insights. And a big thank you to everyone for joining today's webinar. If there are any other questions that you would like to ask us or any of our panelists, please feel free to contact us on insights@gpbullhound.com. You will also receive a link to the recording of today's webinar via email in the next couple of days. We look forward to welcoming you all again very soon. Have a fantastic rest of the day.